totally get from, Fortune 500 and it's the things you have to stick with.
Well, this real thing is Davenport. Was he a farm boy? Looks like that's a farm.
His grandpa.
I call to order this meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see many of you here in person. I will also note that Chief Auditor Klatt and Vice Chair Kenyanya are with us via Zoom. Also joining virtually, we have student representatives Abdullah Ali and Riel Pertu Swanson. Thank you all for joining us. And the first item is the internal audit update. Chief Auditor Klatt, I see you there on the screen.
Good morning. Thank you, Regent Rocha, members of the committee.
I'm not hearing you. Do you have a mute?
No, I'm not on mute at the moment. Can you hear me now?
Still no volume?
Can you hear me now?
Now we've got you. Thank you.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Chair Rocha, members of the Audit and Compliance Committee, student representatives. Thank you for the opportunity to give you an update on the internal audit activities over the last reporting period, which is 4 months. So beginning in your docket material on page 6 as detailed information about the results of our follow-up on outstanding essential audit recommendations. And for this reporting period, 40% of those outstanding recommendations were implemented, and that is our kind of target number. If get implemented every period, almost 100% get implemented over 2 reporting periods because we keep adding as we are taking them off the list as well. So 40% is our target, and this reporting period, the implementation rate achieved target. 8 units completed the implementation on all of their outstanding essential recommendations. 3 units have recommendations that are outstanding over 2 years, and these have all been reported to you before. They residency determination, which involves the fact that each of our professional schools has different residency requirements, and administration's efforts to provide some standardization around those, and they're continuing to work through that issue. It's partly not complicated by, but impacted by the fact that the cycle for that is minimal in that, you know, it's only a couple times a year that residency determinations are going to be made. Second one is up at the University of Minnesota Duluth Fine Arts College, and it is related to the inventory of the museum items at the Tweed Museum and their continued efforts to complete that inventory, which is important for ensuring that we have adequate insurance over that collection. Their efforts were stalled somewhat by the pandemic, that the folks completing the inventory were reluctant to carry out that activity in the pandemic environment. And finally, veterinary medicine, the issue involves the implementation of a new system to help manage activities at an offsite lab, and they're just continuing to make customizations to that system in order to meet their needs. The details about each of them that are outstanding over 2 years is included in your docket material on page 7 and 8. In addition, in our follow-up this period, management accepted the residual risks associated with 3 essential recommendations from 2 audits. An audit of our public safety information technology and disaster recovery. For the public safety recommendations, they dealt with the vendor and partner managed software that's used by our Department of Public Safety, and the fact that public safety is relying on the vendor to conduct appropriate backup and recovery for critical emergency response systems, but that the department has not actually validated or confirmed that those controls are in place. The second recommendation involved the contracts with those vendors and partners, and that they did not always adequately cover the information security and control expectations, and nor have the controls been independently confirmed. And third risk around disaster recovery involves very close proximity of our two primary data centers on the Twin Cities campus, and the risks associated if those would be impacted by a single large-scale disaster in the area. Management reviewed the residual risks of each of those items and determined that they were willing to accept that. Information on that is also included in your materials. I would like to point out for Regent Verhalen, who is new to this committee, that the graphs that are included on page 11 through 25 in the docket material show the impact of the implementation of audit recommendations on the control environment. The first graph will illustrate what the control environment was at the time of the audit, and the third graph will show what the current status is with the implementation of outstanding recommendations, just so that you are aware of what's included in your material. So that concludes our follow-up work and results of that work. If there are any questions on that, or I will proceed.
Thank you for the update. Now turn to the committee for any questions or comments from committee members. Anybody have questions, comments for Chief Auditor Klatt? Regent Verhalen, and then Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. Thank you for the additional explanation as to the charts, and I really do appreciate that. I just really wanted to comment that in looking through these charts and seeing the progression over time, it's very notable what an effort has been made on these different activities throughout the audit function, and so I just wanted to pass along my appreciation.
Thank you. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. And Chief Auditor, on the disaster recovery comment and the fact that local data centers are now, we've transitioned to hosted data centers. I mean, do we regularly test, do we have recovery scenarios? I mean, so we just to make sure that, these things actually work the way they're supposed to. I'm assuming we do, but wanted to ask.
Chief Auditor Klatt.
I would say the answer to that is generally yes. And absolutely for our major systems. Non-essential systems may not have those recovery practices confirmed or validated, tested as frequently as we like. But I would say for our high-risk systems, that is always done routinely.
Regent Powell.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Further questions or comments from members of the committee? Nobody online is signaling in that we can identify. Okay, very good. Next on our agenda is the internal audit plan for fiscal year 2022. I have a audible.
Yeah, no, we're going on to phase 2 of the update.
I'm sorry, my mistake. I missed that. All right, thank you. I saw we had a lot of pages left, but I didn't want to be presumptuous. So, yeah, okay. Chief Auditor Klatt.
All right. So the first part was on work already performed and follow up on those. This section is on what did we complete this reporting period, and we completed 8 audits, and an additional 8 are in process. We also did 3 SNAP reviews. And again, Regent Verhalen, because you're new, SNAP reviews, SNAP means nothing. It's not an acronym. It just means we want them to be done quickly. SNAP is bigger. And these are very targeted reviews to really, in most cases, answer a specific question, like, are employees reporting vacation appropriately? Are people being paid the right amount? Are did we adhere to purchasing policies because of the pandemic? So very targeted, and they're meant to be very short in duration, and they're meant to provide more immediate feedback to central process owners and policy owners of things that we are getting an inkling of as we do other audit work that might be an endemic problem, so that we can determine if there is, and that they can correct that before, without waiting for a formal audit to occur. So just what those SNAP reviews are. So in the audits that we completed an audit of foreign gift and contract reporting. And this is an area of scrutiny by the Department of Education, and it's related to their interest in foreign influence. So they tightened both what they require to be reported and also the rigor in which they're ensuring that institutions of higher education are complying with that. So we reviewed processes and found that we are reporting all the elements that are necessary, and we are doing it on a timely basis. Audited compliance with remote working purchasing policies. These were policies put in place by the Controller's Office at the time that we all went into remote working with the pandemic. So it's a COVID-related audit. And we determined that there was general to the revised policies that were put in place. We conducted an audit of the College of Science and Engineering's Dean's Office and reporting centers. And this includes a review of the NIST 800-171 compliance, which provides requirements for information security standards over certain research-related activities and data. It's relatively new. This is our first instance where those requirements have been put in place at the university, and it's being looked at as a pilot and a model that as other researchers find a need, this could be a model on which we build multiple instances of this type of, not data center, but controls over data activities related to our research portfolio. We also completed an audit of telehealth, which again was a COVID-related audit because the university quickly pivoted to providing healthcare activities through a telehealth platform. And we were interested in seeing that the provision of those services were compliant with the relaxed regulations. And primarily this involved the credentialing of the providers and where they could provide services. Normally it's only within the state in which they're credentialed. And with COVID, the government relaxed that to allow them to provide coverage to out-of-state clients and patients. And we also were interested if how we were providing those services were sustainable from a financial and operational model standpoint, because we see this as, again, an opportunity to broaden our provision of healthcare in the state of Minnesota and further as part of the strategic plan that provides yet one more opportunity. And so if we are going to continue this model, operating model going forward, that it was being conducted in a way that was sustainable. The audit results in the telehealth audit were really quite outstanding, considering how quickly those activities were set up within the institution and in a variety of areas. And we attributed that to, there was just great collaboration among the providers, Boynton, Cook, some folks over in College of Education, no, I think probably College of Liberal Arts actually. And that they used common platforms for providing services in terms of the technology associated with that. So with all of the overall provision of those activities was very controlled and met the compliance aspects that are expected. We conducted an audit of the Board of Regents internal reporting, and that was just to assure that all of you are getting all the reports that are required by your policies. And so that was very straightforward. We did an audit of Northrop and how they fared during the pandemic. We conducted an audit of internally granted research, which is the use of university funds to support research activities and projects. And these are provided by a number of units within the university. Some are centrally funded out of places like the Vice President for Research. Many are funded by colleges themselves and even departments. And they're used for many different reasons. Provide seed funding for areas of research that have strategic importance and implications. It could be to support a young faculty member as they start up their research portfolio. There's a number of uses of those funds, all of which are valid. And it's providing those funds have great latitude determining what type of research they're going to fund for what purposes. Important in this, and one of the reasons we selected it for review is these funds, these research funds are not overseen centrally as our federal sponsored research funds and state sponsored research funds are. These oversight of these particular funds is provided by the unit that is providing the funds. We wanted to make sure there was consistency and good oversight of the use of those funds. We also did an audit of openness in research, and this was to confirm compliance with the Board of Regents policy on this issue. We have seen a trend that federal funding agencies, specifically Department of Defense and Department of Energy, issuing award notices, grant notices that include restrictions that under our policy, under the Board of Regents policy on openness and research, preclude us from applying for those awards without an exemption being granted. And so we wanted to make sure that our exemption process in place and working as intended. And the Vice President for Research, I think, is going to do some additional assessment about the competitive impact of restrictions on our ability to compete for awards of that nature. So that concludes my report on audits completed. We did do a number of SNAP reviews as well, and probably the one that turned out to be more involved than we expected when we started, but we did confirm all the student refunds that were provided last spring when the pandemic occurred. All those refunds to students, whether they were for parking or housing or rec well or whatever, that those refunds were accurate and provided appropriately to the students. So that concludes my update, and I will stand for any questions I have at this point.
All right, thank you very much. Again, questions or comments from members of the committee on this portion of the report? None online, seeing none here. Chief Auditor Klatt, do I dare move on to the next item?
You can dare to move on.
Thank you so much. Next on our agenda is the internal audit plan for fiscal year 2022. Chief Auditor Klatt, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Again, thank you all. So we did not do this last year because we chose with the committee leadership and administration that with the pandemic raging as it was at the time, that it was probably conducive to doing a formal internal audit plan because of all the demands on folks' time and the focus on the pandemic at that time. But here we are back to do it again. And so I'm excited to go through the process with. So first of all, the things I want to cover today are just a quick overview of our 2021 audit results, because the kind of the foundation for where are we at, and when we start thinking about where we want to play our audit resources in the upcoming year. I want to a risk assessment process and how we actually develop the plan on based on what input we receive, et cetera. And talk to you specifically about the audit plan that we're proposing. And in your docket material, and I'll speak to some other required communications, and I would ask that you please review the docket material regarding those if for the speak to in the meeting. So first of all, the 2021 audit results. We completed 27 audits over the last year. We were involved with 3 investigations into either financial or operational misconduct allegations, and we completed SNAP reviews. The overall control evaluation is a assimilation of all the audit findings that we had in the 27 audits. And this our professional assessment of what the control environment looks like at the University of Minnesota. You might note that the bar with the greatest amount of red, which isn't really all that much, is IT security and operations. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, since it's the top risk identified by most organizations, and including institution of higher education. 89% of the 27 audits had satisfactory results, and only 4% were determined to need improvement. So once we look at what does the control environment look like, what are our recent audit results, we then think about, so where do we want to go from here? And so I want to just walk through how we developed the internal audit plan. We began, oh good, you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. Okay, began with information gathering, and we obtained information on all the units within the University of Minnesota, and we make sure that we have everybody within our population we consider for audit coverage. We gather metrics on each of those units, and we look at their prior audit work. We then what we consider our risk assessment or analysis, and we interview a large number, around 70, university leadership and other key staff to talk about changes that are happening in their portfolios, what they see currently or on the horizon, areas that they're particularly concerned about, et cetera. As part of that, we talk to each of the regions and get your questions from a governance standpoint. We'll look at the landscape in terms of what we're seeing in industry publications. We survey other research-intensive universities, and we review what's on the federal landscape as well in terms of priorities and where they're focusing their attention. All that information, decision support model that we have that looks at a number of qualitative and quantitative factors. And that model produces for us a listing of all what we call units within the University of Minnesota, from highest to lowest risk based on just a point value. And that helps us stratify the entire population into tiers. We would then look at our resource availability and see how many audit hours we have to apply to audit coverage, and review our information we received from our interviews and our assessment, as well as our risk model and identify units that are most appropriate for audit coverage. And as we're doing that, we're very cognizant of the institutional risk profile. And this year we paid special attention to those things that have a direct impact on 2025. Those were taken into consideration as we selected areas for audit review. I meet with the president to review the audit plan, and we bring it to the audit committee for your concurrence as well. So our resource allocation for fiscal 2022, the percentages are extremely consistent, as you can see, over the last, I would say over the last decades. Our resource allocations look pretty much the same in terms of our budgets. Actual may vary because sometimes we have large investigations that detract hours from scheduled audit work. But for the most part, our resource allocations follows the same pattern. So about 65% of our time is allocated to doing scheduled audits, of our time to do investigations, 10% to address Board of Regents or administrative requests for audit services. It's important for the committee to remember that we are the only audit function at the University of Minnesota. And so the administration at times needs access to our resources to attend to audit needs that come up in the course of business. 4% on follow-up activities and about 15 to 16% on administrative activities. I will point out that our resources for this particular year and last year we were down one FTE because of the hiring pause. We have one open position that is specifically dedicated to information technology auditing that we have not been able to fill. And so our plan is based on not having that resource available. We have reached agreement with the administration to open recruiting for that position. And so once it will be difficult to recruit for the demand, but once we have that resource on staff, we will go back and look at our resources and add audit projects as consistent with the resources that are available. So when we deploy our audit resources and select units for particular coverage, what do we think about? What do we consider? One, we always want to make sure that we're providing adequate coverage over high-risk activities. High risk does not mean poorly controlled. High risk means they're really critical to the operations of the university. So there are many of our very central, our central business processes, large academic units, et cetera. And we have a gentleman or gentlewoman's agreement with the committee that we strive to provide audit coverage for each of those high-risk activities on a 3 to 4 year audit cycle. So we'll see which of those high-risk activities are next in line for audit review. We also, this is a personal criteria for me, I really want audit coverage provided in every major organizational component. So in the provost office, on system campuses, in our healthcare area, in human resources, et cetera, because internal audit in some ways is a deterrent, and I think it's just good for folks in all the components to have the opportunity to see and engage with an auditor from time to time. So making sure we have coverage in those organizational components is important to me. Again, consider the institutional risk profile. We want to select that will help inform you about the risks you feel are most important. So we look for consistency with that. And again, this year with MPAC 2025 being pretty much hot off the press, we're paying particular attention to areas that have a direct relationship to those priorities set up by the administration. And finally, as we do our risk interviews with administrative leaders, they often will require audits in particular areas within their portfolio, and we certainly take that into consideration as well, as do members of the Board of Regents when we talk to them. So those are how we the priorities we think about as we select particular units. For 2022, the university, what we consider to be our audit universe, breaks down into these dimensions. There are 26 activities that are considered high risk, 100 that are considered moderate risk, and 44 that are considered low risk. So high risk, again, our operating model is to try to provide audit coverage to those activities in over a 3 to 4 year cycle. Moderate risk over a 4 to perhaps 10 year cycle, and low risk 10 years to in actuality never. There are some units that have never had audit coverage and that their risk is so low that it does not provide an adequate return on that investment. So when we did our risk assessment and looked both at the internal and the external landscape, we identified key themes. And I would tell you, this was an interesting year in this, especially coming off of what we have come off of the last year, that there was tremendous consistency among higher education institutions, the themes internally, themes in industry publications, et cetera, and consulting firms, et cetera, all the people who think about risk areas, these were tremendously consistent. So we are right with everybody else. So these were how the campus recovers after COVID-19, campus safety and social unrest. And campus safety has been on this list for a long time, but social unrest is a new aspect of that, a different way to look at the prism of campus safety. Staffing, and this might look like it's really University of Minnesota centric, but many of our peer group and research universities, all universities, practices, responses to COVID, and have an equal level of interest in making sure that those strategies achieve the results that they were interested in. So again, the retirement incentive option, the hiring pause, and the return to work, how well all of those worked to provide some relief, as well as opportunities for our fourth, diversity, equity, inclusion, and this is new this year, and it's on everybody's list. So it's obviously has entered definitely the mainstream of consciousness by governing boards. System campus enrollment and finances and challenges that are being experienced on each of our system campuses. They're different, but they all have them. Finally, information security and data management. Again, has been on the list for higher education and almost every industry, every enterprise within the country over the last several years. The audit plan, having looked at all of that, the themes, our units, our cycling, the fact that we want to visit every operational component, etc. Here on slide and page, I can't read it, something of 69 in material, is the outline of the plan that we propose for this year. And I will tell you, I've mentioned to you earlier over the last year that I really personally value having an internal audit plan. It provides great accountability for the internal audit function, that you provide us with resources. We tell you what we're going to do with those resources via our plan. And then at the end of the year, we come back and we tell you what did we accomplish out of that, and what didn't we get done and why. And that's great accountability for us. And so I really value that. But I really have found I appreciated the flexibility of the plan that we had last year, and that it allowed us to be extremely nimble and agile to meet emerging needs in a very quick, responsive way. So I mentioned a couple meetings ago that my challenge for this audit plan was going to be to try to find a way to marry the two and have the accountability and also build in greater flexibility, opportunities for greater flexibility. The plan does this. I'm not sure it hits 100% on the mark in terms of the organization, not necessarily the units we've selected, but we did this year was we are thinking about our plan in 2 tiers, one high tier or first tier, and then second tier. The first tier plan on your slide in bold. And those are the audits that we are committed to complete this year. The tier 2 are those that are not bold, and these are planned to be performed, but these would be the that we would look at swapping out, if you will, if some emerging topic presents itself that we believe warrants audit attention. I'm not sure that this is 100%. I don't know. We will most likely tweak this as we go, but it's at least a beginning of thinking about our plan in a more agile that provides us opportunity to make periodic changes. And if we do swap any of these out, we would, of course, report those at the next Audit and Compliance Committee meeting so that you are kept aware of those decisions as they're made. So I'm going to move to the next slide because this will break down. The next slide is process audits. So the first slide was unit audits, and these are process audits that generally are done system-wide and look at the process from kind of cradle to grave. So they're approached in a slightly different way than unit audits. But what I want to do is move to, it's going to come up. We'll get back to it. No, I'm going to keep going, and I'll speak to more specific topics on the items that are included in the audit plan in a couple slides. So on the audit coverage of institutional risk, we've provided where we have provided coverage over the last 3 fiscal years, and the audit, or the last 2, and then the audit coverage that is expected to occur in fiscal year 2022. So here is what I want to talk about. Here's specific units that were selected to speak to specific items in the institutional risk profile. So in the area of high-risk research, we intend to do audits of COVID-related research. These were, when COVID happened, we stood up a lot of research activities related to COVID, and we would want to just make sure that from a research standpoint and the regulations around that, we adhered to all the regulatory requirements that are expected. The Department of Neurology, the Genomics Center, Research Animal Resources, and Academic and Research Misconduct. In the area of representational diversity, we're looking at that specifically in the graduate school. We're going to select a topic from accessibility and disability services. This is a very large unit that covers many aspects of providing those services, and we'll pick a reasonable number of them to review in a specific audit project. And we are also doing a collaborative assessment on employee immigration. In information technology and security, failure, resilience, and cost, we'll be looking at information technology services on the University of Minnesota Duluth campus, looking at our energy plant, energy management and steam plant, Canvas, Unison, which is our course technology, classroom technology, help desk and incident management in our information technology area, and information technology in the veterinary medical center. In the area of campus safety, energy management in the steam plant will inform on certain aspects of the campus safety, housing and residential life, and University of Minnesota Duluth services. Legal and regulatory requirement compliance. We do a sport audit in athletics to look specifically at NCAA compliance, as well as our financial operations. COVID research, again, because of regulatory impact. We will review the Minnesota State COVID-19 testing contract and compliance with that contract. We're going to revisit I-9 processing, which was a major issue several years ago and warranted significant improvement, and test and see if those improvements have been sustained. Again, research animal resources, accessibility, and immigration. As you might expect, many of these audits will touch on multiple area risks identified in the risk profile. And finally, brand and reputational management, accessibility and disability services, gift testing that we do under a memorandum of understanding with the University of Minnesota Foundation, research animal resources, and athletic financial activities. Moving on, in terms of my personal criteria to ensure coverage by major components, this graph illustrates how the allocation of audit resources impacts each of the major components. And the largest, of course, being the provost in the health sciences. This is where all of our academic unit work happens. So based on my review of the audit plan and how it was developed, I think it provides reasonable audit coverage across all the major components of the university, that it addresses the risks currently impacting the university, and addresses risk areas identified by the Audit and Compliance Committee as important through the institutional risk profile. And with that, I will stand for any questions folks might have.
Thank you, Chief Auditor Klatt. We'll now turn to the committee. I've got Regents Swigum first on the docket.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chief Auditor Klatt, you give me comfort, and your team gives me comfort, especially when I get your audit summaries. I look to see if everything's copacetic, if everything is accountable. I don't even have to look onto the rest of the information you send me. Chief Auditor Klatt, I was wondering this. I think, and I can't find it right here, but you did last year like 27 audits, was it? You performed 27 audits and a dozen SNAP audits, I believe it was.
Correct.
And you ended up doing 3 investigations.
Mm-hmm.
What's involved in an investigation? Give me a little bit about the process that's involved in an investigation, and tell me about that a little bit, would you?
Chief Auditor Klatt.
Certainly, Regent Rocha, Regent Swigum. Most of our investigations come through the U report. confidential reporting line for the university. And when within a report made in that there's allegation of operational or financial misconduct, we are asked to review those and determine if there's merit to the allegations. So that normally comes once in a while, they'll come directly to us. We also periodically get referrals from the Office of the Legislative Auditor if something comes through their hotline related to the university. We did not have any of those this year, but they do come to us that way. So those are probably the three primary ways that they get our attention.
Mr. Chairman,
please.
Mr. Chairman, Chief Auditor Klatt, when you do an investigation, do you coordinate with other agencies or departments? Is that all done by yourself, or do you involve the Minneapolis Police Department, or do you involve UMPD? Is there any other association that you work with?
Chief Auditor Klatt.
They're Regents, they're highly coordinated, especially with UMPD, because when there's potential for criminal activity, we need to conduct that work in a very disciplined way. That's the wrong word for it, but to protect the ability for us to turn the results of that investigation over for prosecution. And so there's many rules we need to follow, and warnings and things that we need to provide employees, et cetera. And so we work very closely with the General Counsel's Office, with UMPD, often with Human Resources. We don't do any coordination with like the City of Minneapolis or the Minneapolis Police Department. That would happen through our police department. We wouldn't do that ourselves, but there's a great amount of coordination to make sure that we don't do things in any way that precludes subsequent action on behalf of the university.
So, Mr. Chairman,
please.
You do coordinate with our General Counsel Office, and you do coordinate with HR in the investigations. So, now,
Yes.
Chief Auditor Klatt, this is probably a few months in advance, but you do give me great comfort, and I hope upon retirement your successor will give me the same comfort.
As do I.
Thank you, Regent Spigum. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, Chief Auditor. Before I do that, I also want to just thank you for you and your team for the diligence and the dexterity, going through the last year. I think it was very wise counsel for us not to establish a plan in this environment, but rather to, look where the issues would be in an extraordinary environment. And I think your team have done really exceptionally well. So thanks to you and thanks to them. A couple of questions, just maybe these, just to remind the committee. So for high risk audits, and I'll just pick energy management, the steam plant. Can you remind us of, how do we decide that is a high risk audit? Is it sort of the likelihood of an event coupled with the impact, or I think if you could just remind us of the criteria to fall into that high risk category. And then a related question is, it's 26 high risk, 108 moderate, and 44 low. I mean, okay, just on the surface, sort of say it seems like maybe a few too many low risk, given that they're low risk. Maybe you can comment on the amount of resources that are going. I'm assuming that the numbers don't match. That there's a very high sort of person hours going into those high risk and relatively low. So on that basis, the kind of the numbers would be different. I don't know if that's clear or not, but I just want to make sure that we have the right allocation across high, moderate, and low.
Chief Auditor Klatt.
Certainly. In regard to the steam plant, I would say that the major criteria that makes that high risk is the dependency of the university on the services provided by the steam plant to, give us heat and cooling. And that if that steam plant was not operable, it would have a significant and negative impact on the operation of the campus. And then coupled with that, there's certainly a significant financial activity associated with it as well. So those two things would be the things that would drive that to the university. There's no other redundancy in that system. And so we need to make sure the plant operates as effectively and efficiently and dependably as the campus needs it to. In the case of the high, moderate, and low, you're very astute. If you looked at a similar type of risk bell-shaped curve or whatever, in a for-profit company, you would not nearly find that large of a percentage of low-risk units. They just wouldn't have them. They would scuttle them because they're not profitable. But higher education, it's very common that it has kind of this lopsided bell-shaped curve. And I mean, there's just some units that are important to the university, but they don't bring to the university much risk. The fact of the matter is, to provide audit coverage of any particular unit requires a certain amount of investment, whether it's high risk or low risk. And sometimes just that initial need, use of audit resources to kind of get it on the books, just in a low risk unit, just doesn't make sense to even make that amount of investment. And so that's why sometimes the answer to when was this last audited, the answer is never.
Regent Paul, please.
Question?
Yes, thank you, Chief Auditor. And one other question, and you referenced that, the institutional risk profile is really, really important. Just maybe, again, as we look at the, a coming transition, is that profile, does it continue to be up to date in your view? Does it need work? Is it, you highlighted some sort of new risks that are popping up. And so just your, off the cuff assessment of how we stand with that risk profile.
Chief Auditor Clapp.
Regent Rocha, Regent Powell. So nice for you to bring that up. I just mentioned to Regent Rocha a couple of days ago that perhaps we would want to put that on the committee work plan for the next year, just to revisit it to see if it needs to have adjustments made. I do think there's probably opportunities either to add risks or be more specific about the risks that are currently there, some of which are very broad, and we may now have a better sense for what aspects of certain risks we're most concerned about, and we could hone it down a little bit. But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's time to do a little revisit of it.
Regent Powell.
It will sure be helpful to have, your thoughts and guidance on, where we need to be more specific and where the opportunities will be. I mean, obviously that's, future work, but it'll be extremely welcome, I think, to have your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Further questions or comments from members of the committee? Further questions or comments? All right. Well, our final item today is information items. Oh, I'm getting another, hold on. Chief Auditor Clapp, what did I miss this time?
I just want to point out a couple items in what we look at as our required communication, which actually 42 of your docket material. The first is that we are obligated to report to you any impairments in our independence over the last year. And we did not have any impairments. We did adjustments to our planned audit work, and those decisions were made by us within the audit function, and they related to the auditing of activities that just could not be done from a remote standpoint. They were activities that required being on site, and since the university was not operating on site, it was difficult to impossible for us to do that. So in those cases, we scoped those items of work and determined that they were that there was still sufficient work to draw conclusions on. But we had no external impairment to our audit coverage or scope of work. Would point you to our information on our staffing and credentialing of our audit staff. You are blessed with having a highly professional, well-credentialed, and experienced audit staff that has a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge, and that all adds to the quality of the audit coverage that's provided and the information that you receive out of that process. I'd point you to our the section on the internal audit office's budget, and we did take a 3% reallocation to our budget as consistent with what other areas within the institution, and in fact ours was not as high as some we're taking. But it is important for you to understand that the construct of our budget is solely out of O&M money, and we have no other sources of revenue, and about 96% of our budget is salary and fringe of our staff. So we have limited other opportunities to reduce budget except to reduce staff. So when that happens, as budget cuts are made, at some point that requires us to reduce audit staff, which reduces the amount of audit coverage we're able to provide. So it's just important for me to know that you are all made aware of that. And that, Regent Roshan, we can go on to the information items.
Please proceed.
We have one information item, and it's the university's controller's office university's controller's semi-annual controller's report. And Sue Paulson is available by phone if anyone has any questions or comments on that report.
Thank you. Do we have questions or comments from any members of the committee? No questions or comments on that. That brings us to the end of our agenda today. Before we adjourn, I remind everyone we'll have a short break now, and the Mission Fulfillment Committee meeting will begin promptly at 9:15 a.m. A couple people have made allusions to this. I would just point out that I believe this is the last time we will meet in this configuration, or at least likely the last in this configuration, because we'll be having some changes with board structure going forward. So this is my opportunity to thank Chief Auditor Klatt for her wisdom and her expertise, her counsel over these last couple of years. I know this is probably an emotional moment for Regent Verhalen in her connection with the Audit Committee of these during this 60 minutes. But seriously, thank you very, very much. It's been a great pleasure to work with Vice Chair Kenyanya, who is with us virtually, and for all members of the board for your attention and diligence and great questions and insights. So thank you very much all for that. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned.
Nicely done.
Yeah, good.